Just a quick heads up that these are adults having adult conversations about things that take place on a show where the adults use a lot of adult language. All this to say there might be some salty language ahead, so please plan accordingly.
Now look, this is a sad moment right here. For all of us. There ain't nothing I can say standing in front of you right now that could take that away. But please, do me this favor, will you? Lift your heads up and look around this locker room. Yeah? Look at everybody else in here. And I want you to be grateful that you're going through this sad moment with all these other folks. Because I promise you, there is something worse out there than being sad, and that is being alone and being sad. Ain't nobody in this room alone.
What would Ted Lasso do? This is a question that we explore in each episode of this podcast. We take the lessons we learned from Ted Lasso and we apply them to the real world through the lens of leadership and positive psychology. My name is Dimple DeBalia.
And my name is Jeff Harry. And neither of us have ever recorded a podcast. But as Ted Lasso says, taking on a challenge is a lot like riding a horse. If you're comfortable while you're doing it, you're probably doing it wrong.
We hope you enjoy this episode as much as we enjoyed making it, and that it helps you find new ways to believe.
All right. How's it going? How's your weekend?
This was a lovely weekend, but also this was a lovely episode. So
Yeah. I can't believe we're on the last one.
I know, this is crazy.
I feel like the time has just gone so quickly. Yeah. So we're on episode 10, The Hope That Kills You.
Woo.
Written by Jason Sudeikis, Bill Lawrence, and Brendan Hunt. And again, directed by M.G. Delaney. All right. So last one. What do you think? What came up for you?
Oh, just the title alone is powerful. And I love how it opens, because it opens with Nate thinking he's getting replaced, that he's getting fired. And he finally confronts Rebecca and he says something so mean to her. He's like, "You shrew." He's so angry. And then not only do they pull the curtain and then the whole team's there to celebrate with him, but the whole time I'm looking at that, I was like, that team 5 weeks ago would have never done that, right? If anything, they were bullying this kid this whole time. And now finally they're recognizing him. So I was like, wow, talk about a win, talk about hope. So that's the first part where I was just like, oh, if nothing else comes from this episode, that was just beautiful.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, so I think it's longer than 5 weeks though, right? It's been months. But yeah, your point is a good one, which is that to see the arc of where they started to where they are now is pretty incredible. And it was so heartwarming. I mean, it's interesting, right? That it tells you a lot about Nate's personality and where he's at in terms of his own self-confidence and things like that, to where his mind would immediately go, he hasn't done anything wrong. And yet his mind would immediately go to this place of, oh, I'm getting fired. And to the point of where he would speak to Rebecca in that way. When he called her a shrew, you see Higgins behind him. I don't know if you noticed, but Higgins goes, he has this look on his face where he's like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen now? And so you see that there's a little bit of that courage in there too, to where he would, say something like that. But that whole scene was just so cute. And the whistle box, I thought that was such a nice touch. All the boxes that he had created, for all the different things when he was collecting money for Sam and they created one for him, which I thought was really just a really nice touch.
Which they at one point considered corny. And then he even had a joke. This whistle's so sad because it's never been blown.
Right.
And then he burned, I'm not going to say it, but then he burned one of the players that way. And I was like, woo. I was like, Nate's got a little wit to him.
Yeah.
Nate's got that little sass.
Yeah.
But also he still doesn't know when to blow the whistle. So this is the part that's also so interesting, is just there is some also imposter syndrome too, of them being like, okay, how do I lead now in this different space? And if you think about it, and maybe this is projecting, but if you think about it, like different roles are being changed in this last episode. Nate, then Roy, there's another theme appearing.
Yeah. Well, and to your point about the not knowing when to blow the whistle, right? Like, I hadn't really thought about that till you just mentioned it, but it's so true because when you think about a lot of like young leaders who get thrown into these positions of leadership, like they don't know, right? Like there's this idea like, okay, now I'm in this leadership role and they overcompensate.
Yeah. Like way overcompensate.
Yeah. And that's kind of what that whistleblowing looks like. It's like, he's just like, all right, they said my name, I'm going to blow the whistle. Like,
is this when I lead? Everyone needs to know I'm the leader. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's still that maturity that needs to be developed. Right. But going back to what you said about hope. Yeah. Like, obviously that was like the overarching kind of theme to this one. And the other themes that came up for me really were around motivation. And so looking at like, again, Nate's way of motivating is very externally based. Whereas I feel like Ted's motivation for himself and for the team is really about trying to find more internal motivation. And so kind of that contrast. And then agency, like, especially when we're in a leadership role, instill a sense of agency in the people around us that we're leading, right? So that they feel like they can go out, like they build that confidence to go out and do what they need to do, which I think is really such a big piece of this. And then what you just said about, the evolution of roles, like things change in every organization. So how do you navigate that change?
And I think that's the part that's also fascinating for me with the entire episode is everyone's role is kind of changing. And what I mean by that is like those 4 fans in the bar are now a little nicer to Ted, I mean, the fact that they, Jamie's role with Keely, and Roy's role with Keely, and Ted thinks he's going to get fired after this. Like, there's so many interesting parallels. And then, of course, Roy giving up the captain spot to McAdoo. And then he doesn't give it up at the very beginning. He gives it right before the game, too. So it's just like, man, this is interesting. This is interesting how this is going to evolve.
Yeah. I'm just like, I don't even know where to start. So maybe like this idea of motivation, because that's like towards the beginning, right? So we see like the team is gathered because they're trying to figure out there's such a sense of hopelessness in the room. And I think there's a lot of people in their heads because relegation is like, it's there, it's like hanging over them. And I don't know, like it reminded me of when I was in law school, when I finished law school and I had to take the bar exam. And I remember like right before I took it, like talking to a friend who had taken it and he had failed the first time. And then he took it again, he passed. And so we had lunch one day and he said, look, you need to go into this not thinking that this is like the end all be all. Like it's just another test. It's just another part of this process. And I think like for them, for a lot of them, like relegation, like with that hanging over your head, like it gets in there and it makes it so that it's so hard to think like about anything else, And so as they're all sitting there, I just thought it was funny. So Nate's way of motivating the team is to bring in that video of Jamie like bad mouthing the team.
Right.
And also, sorry, just side note, I don't know if you saw or if you really heard what Jamie said, but towards the end, he says, Lasso sent me away and now they're facing the drop. And then he says, Sunday, I get to put the final nail in the ashes. and then he says, instant caramel,
wow.
The candy, it's going to get you. So Jamie's not the smartest tool in the shed, but
I did not pick that up.
I thought that was so funny. But yeah, so Nate's like, he knows and even as he's like showing the video, like at the beginning, Jamie's like, oh, I'd never badmouth my team. And people are like, oh, and you see Nate go, give it a minute,
Yeah.
And so in his mind, he's like, all right, this is the way to motivate people is to let them know, like, hey, you've got this jerk on the other side, put him in his place.
Mm-hmm.
And Ted's approach is kind of like, you guys have the knowledge. Let's come up with these trick plays. Let's use the knowledge that you already have to, create a plan for how we're going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought that was really interesting.
Well, I mean, talk about even motivation, just backtracking a little bit. Think about where even Ted got his inspiration, right?
Right. Yes.
So he's always been trying to motivate Rebecca to care about the team, right? All this time. And finally, now she's the one inspiring him. And it reminds me of my friend Jen Abels, who used to run this program, Soldiers Who Salsa, and she would work with amputees and veterans that could barely walk, but she showed them how to salsa. She described it as almost like she was giving them a ball of light. And then when she was going through a tough time later on, they would remind her, hey, you got me to dance. Hey, the reason why I got married to my spouse was because I was brave enough to go out on the dance floor. And so I feel like all this time that Ted has been given the cookies and sitting down with her and the jokes and all this stuff, finally, he's given her so much light that she's now giving him a little bit of it back. And it's so empowering, right? That he's so excited that he leaps. And I actually heard,
Mm-hmm.
he did that on purpose. It was a blooper that they just kept in. He actually really did hit his head. And that is her real reaction, which is oh my gosh.
He hurt himself pretty badly on that one.
And he kept going. He kept going with it. I think he had to get stitches for that or whatever it is. But that excitement. And then just the idea, think about the idea of causing utter confusion, causing utter chaos. And that idea that every disadvantage has an advantage. You would only think that disadvantages are just bad all day. You're just bad. You're just negative. You're just horrible. But it's just no, actually, you now have a perspective that a lot of people don't. So, why don't we actually utilize that? I think that was really powerful. I think the other part was, regarding the quote again. What is it? Is it it's the hope that kills you?
Yeah.
Oh, in the hope that kills you, I think of Brene Brown talking about foreboding joy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That even when you think there might be joy, you destroy it because it's going to go badly. And it's they're so scared of getting hurt. And I get it, man. We all feel that way. That we're well, let me just be miserable the whole time and just guarantee that we're going to just lose on purpose. So I never have to be disappointed. And it's that is a rough life to live, but there's a lot of people that live that life.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Going back to what you were talking about with Rebecca, talking about every disadvantage has an advantage. I think to your point, most people, again, and this is just a very human reaction, we automatically jump to the negative, and we have that built-in negativity bias that takes us there, right? And so it's interesting because I don't know if you remember from positive psychology training that there's this whole idea of hope theory. And I think a lot of people aren't aware of it. And I was trying to figure out how this idea of the hope that kills you and Ted's take on hope, whether that really fit into the actual theory. And it kind of does. So the hope theory was actually something that was created by a researcher named Charles Snyder, for those of you who aren't aware of that. And the idea is that when we think about hope, we're really looking at actual goals that we want to achieve and then different pathways that we create to actually get there. And there's an element of what they call agency thoughts. And so this is where we are trying to find the motivation to take those different create those different pathways and take them to get to our goals. And then there's barriers. So these are the things, again, these are those disadvantages that Rebecca mentions. And so Ted himself is really kind of a high hope individual. We've seen that from the beginning, right? That he even says, I believe in hope, I believe in belief. And so for him, he sees these kinds of barriers and challenges as things that can be overcome, right? And so he uses kind of the like his own pathways as like thoughts that he can use to plan other routes to achieve his goals. And so that's what he's trying to do with the team now, right? Is getting them to see that there isn't just one way of doing this. I like what you said about like Rebecca, like showing him the light now, that there are other pathways, because he, for the first time, is kind of like, I don't see any pathways. Like, I'm not good at this. I don't know anything about this sport. And she's helping him to see, well, actually, there are other pathways that you could take. And he just needs that little spark of inspiration to get there. And I thought that was actually really cool to see how that all started to come together.
And the fact that she believes, right? That's the spark, if anything. The fact that she believes and is like willing to like almost like slap the sign is like a serious thing. I think another one part that I thought was really interesting was when Jamie comes over to Keely's house.
Yes.
And then Roy is there and Jamie's like, oh, gross. But there's at one point, it's funny because like Jamie wants to talk to Keely and then he's like, can Roy leave? Roy's like, I'm not leaving. And then I think about like attunement, right? Like Roy and Jamie don't get along. But there's a point when Roy like takes his hand and is just like, zips up his mouth and throws the key, which is like kind of ridiculous and kind of playful. But then Jamie dodges the fake key. Like they're playing together. Like it's fascinating that they're playing together. Even though they hate each other, they also are vibing together. They're more on the same page than they were when they were teammates. That's what I find really fascinating. They actually have a connection.
They do. And I think a lot of this speaks to the growth that both of them have had over the season, right? So the fact that Jamie would actually write to Keely to say, hey, can I come over, first of all, instead of just showing up. And I don't know if you noticed on his text message, it looks like the last time he actually texted her was when they were together, because that's where you see the eggplant, squirty water, chipmunk text. This is like the first time that he's actually writing to her to say that. And when he shows up, he's got coffee and, and all of that.
Yep.
But it's not Roy who says he's not leaving. It's Keely who says that Jamie can say whatever he needs to.
Right.
I want to take a minute just to acknowledge her. Like, she is like a master diplomat. Like, when she figures out that they've each made her coffee and she's got a relationship with each of them.
And then pours them both together.
Yeah. And she never apologizes, right? So at the end, like when Jamie walks out and looks at Roy before he walks out and says, oh, like, I look forward to seeing you on the bench. Like, that's a real dig. And I could easily see where someone in Keely's position would feel really bad about letting Jamie have come over and to let him insult Roy in that way or whatever. She doesn't apologize. She kind of stands her ground and like, and then Roy, of course, is like, yeah, now I want mushy peas. And so like,
right. Which is funny because it was a good joke by Jamie, and then Roy's like, well, I'm just going to roll with it. Like in the past, he'd want to fight him. But,
yeah. But if you think about Jamie's motivation, right? So I really love this scene too, but when we flash forward after the game and we see like his father berating him and like, so Jamie's got such an external, like in the MP course that I teach, we talk about having like an internal critical coach and an internal compassionate coach. And those are like the two sides of the thoughts that are constantly talking to us, right? And mostly it's the critical coach that's telling us things. But Jamie's got an external version of that with his father. So not only does he have his own like inner critic, but he's got his like father actually like getting on him. And so it's not surprising that he doesn't trust Ted's motives, right? Because to him, like, as far as he sees it, Ted gave him away, didn't care. And now he's playing all these mind games and he can't see that there's a possibility that Ted actually genuinely cares,
Yeah. Yeah. He almost sees everyone through the lens of his dad.
Yes.
Like everyone is out to use him and like abuse him. And the only way in which to protect himself is to just then push them away. So like, that's fascinating.
But Ted's also kind of a father figure in a way, right? Like he's kind of stepped into that role without necessarily trying to. And it's interesting because Ted's conversation with his son, right? Like before the game where his son says, like, it doesn't look like you do anything out there when you're coaching. And he gives that whole talk about like, well, I really don't, like Once the game gets going, like I can't tell my people what to do. I have to hope that everything I've been trying to teach them has made an impact and that they're going to make the right decisions on their own. And I think that that applies to Jamie as well. I don't think that he means it just for his immediate team. And he even says it's a lot like being a dad, I guess. And so I think that he's taken on like this father role for a lot of the guys on the team, including Jamie. But the difference is like he genuinely wants to see Jamie succeed.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes me think that's the role of so many leaders, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just like you only are doing like one-on-ones or meetings with people like, once a week or twice a week or whatever it is. And then you just got to trust.
Yeah.
And a lot of people can't handle that, right? And, there's something about that. But there's something like also magical about when you finally start to see someone do something without you having to do it. So like when McAdoo takes the chair and throws it at the TV, that's when Roy's like, dude, he's the captain. I'm not going to tell him that now. We didn't even know that, but it was just like at that moment, he was just like, good on you. Like there was something else about when he was talking to his son, though. They were showing Bryant's barbecue.
Oh, yeah. That's been his background the whole time. Yeah.
Oh, has that always been his background? I only started noticing that I was like looking for the Easter eggs. I'm like, where's Bryant's barbecue? I've never known about the barbecue place. Right.
So in a couple of the episodes, he's got a t-shirt on, but he's wearing it like in the scene where he's trying to sign his divorce papers. And that lists the four main like Kansas City barbecue joints. And those shirts were actually created by a friend of his, like a childhood friend of his. And so he's like,
oh, okay.
Yeah. But yeah, Kansas City. So lots of shout outs to Kansas City throughout the show.
So when Jamie finally gives him the captain thing, the captain armband, and then goes, never stop breaking TVs. I think that's so poignant because it's this idea of like, never stop following your convictions.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think he's actually been watching Isaac like through the whole, like over the season, right? Because we see like in a few different scenes, because there's earlier in the season, once he like tells Isaac to stop bullying Nate, like Isaac stops, right? And not only does he stop, he goes in the opposite direction of trying to create more belonging for Nate. And so there's a scene where Roy and Isaac are sitting next to each other, and there's a talk in the locker room, and Isaac scoots over to let Nate sit down, and you see Roy kind of watching him. And then there's another scene where they're in Liverpool, the movie night, and the guy sitting next to Isaac is looking at his phone, and Isaac's like, bumps him to like be like, no, like turn your phone off. And you see behind him, Roy's like watching him. So I think Roy's been noticing throughout that Isaac has those qualities of being a leader, just like Ted has noticed like the qualities of leaders in different players on his team. And so you see that Roy himself is a leader in that way, I think that's actually really lovely too.
Then going into like right before the game starts, right? And right before the talk, like Keely, and Rebecca are sitting together, and then Higgins brings his whole family. First time Higgins brings his whole family. You're like, how many people do you have in your family, Higgins? I don't know why the priest showed up. I really didn't understand that part.
That's his son too.
Oh, yeah, that's his son too, right? Like, but then Keely says something about like, I go to a lot of these games and most of the times I don't care.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden now I do care. And also seeing Rebecca in the Richmond colors for the first time, caring, it built this whole like thing where then now I'm caring even more. And then you're looking at the bar and it's full of everyone that's like hoping. I mean, for a group that isn't wanting to hope, there's a lot of hope.
Yeah, there really is. And it's interesting though, going back to that idea of the hope that kills you, because it's like everyone around them believes that, right? So even the announcer, when they're showing people coming into the stadium, he even says, well, they all know that's the hope that kills you, And they say that they're going to need veteran leadership to get through this. And that's when we see like Roy hand over the armband. I just kept thinking about how hard it would be to overcome a belief like that you've had like your whole life, to get that out of your head and to think in a different way. And you have to do that for there to be hope, right?
Well, and this, tying into like, what's happening right now, but like this this is why people love sports. I think a lot of people love sports for the idea that even if I've been cheering for a team for so long and they've been so bad for so many years, the one time they break through, it almost feels like it's changed your life.
Mm-hmm.
This past weekend, in the NFL, this team, the Cincinnati Bengals, won and is going to the Super Bowl. This is the first time they're going to the Super Bowl since 1989, and they've never won. Right? And this city gets no love. Like, absolutely no one ever wants to go to Cincinnati, right? Like, you're just not, no one wins in Cincinnati. There's and just the amount of hope and joy that city got from this team winning a game, makes you believe that maybe I can accomplish other things, right? Like, maybe I can do. And I wonder what levels joy goes up and productivity and belief in oneself when something like that happens to a city that has been struggling for any sign of hope.
Yeah. And going back to, the research piece of it, there's a ton of research that shows there's a direct correlation between having hope and then that correlation to joy and positive emotions and things like that. So I'm certain that in Cincinnati today, people are feeling so much better. Ironically, they beat the Kansas City Chiefs. So back to the Kansas City connection. But yeah, I agree. I think things like sports, definitely there's always an underdog, and there's the teams that are doing really well. And it's something that people kind of connect over. And you see, I was thinking about that with the pub, right? And all the people gathered in the pub every week to watch the match. And it creates that sense of community as well, right? When you have something that you're all kind of cheering for and towards. And we see that even here, with tailgating and things like that, right?
Yeah. What's interesting is the Cincinnati Bengals chant is called Who Dey. And it's this chant of who are these people? What is this team? Who cares about this team? And it's just we care. We matter. It's all about mattering and being
yeah,
who they. And it's just hey, we're around, pay attention to us. So it's so fascinating because again, it's all about meaning and recognition and being hey, I exist. I'm here. I need to feel seen. And now I finally feel seen.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a fundamental human need, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't there, I could be wrong, but I thought that in the weeks leading up to the playoffs that there were a lot more believe signs and stuff happening at the Bengals games too. I feel that was showing up in the news. Yeah.
I'm sure there is. So that even ties then in with Ted Lasso's speech, which I found really powerful, right? Because he's I don't like this saying it's the hope that kills you. I disagree. I think it's the lack of hope that kills you.
Yeah.
And I was that's fascinating. He goes, I believe in belief.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes, do you believe in miracles? And he's I don't want you to answer that out loud, but I do want you to answer that question for yourself. And then they pan over to, who's that guy?
Sam.
Yeah, Sam. And Sam smiles.
Yeah.
And you're he's I do believe. And it's just you're finally, and you can see it in the group that they are starting this belief. And I think of the Do You Believe in Miracles speech, which is really amazing. I forgot who the actor was, but yeah, that is one of the best sports movie speeches of all time. And, in that speech, he's all about, the U.S. are playing the Russians. And he's hey, the Russians would beat us 9 out of 10 times. But today we are the greatest hockey team in the world. And when he says that to all these 19, 20, and 21-year-olds, they're yeah, why not? Why can't we be that? Just like the Bengals, right? Why can't we win this game? I can believe for one moment, I can believe for a 2-hour game that I am amazing. And that's the part that I'm whoa, this is awesome.
Yeah. It's interesting, just what's happening in the locker room in general, right? You see, there's you can feel the nervous energy even just watching it, right? The other thing that's just going back to like how layered this show is and just how much they do without actually having to say words. So when they're kind of panning around the room, you see Sam praying, and it's not like your traditional, like what you would see in a lot of places where people are like crossing themselves and stuff like that. It looks more like a Muslim prayer, and I just love that. Like they're showing like the different like backgrounds and, the diversity that exists without ever having to say a word or overtly do anything, and I just think that that's really beautiful too.
I think that happens right when they get into the huddle too, right? Because like McAdoo, Roy looks to McAdoo, or he's also known as Isaiah, right?
Isaac
McAdoo. And then McAdoo brings his hand in and it's like, oh, I'm now the captain.
Yeah.
And then McAdoo does something that I don't understand, because he counts up, right? Up to 12, but then he skips 8. Why? Do you know why? Like, is there something in the, in the Lasso sphere that they've like broke it down? Because I was like, first off, I've never heard a chant where they're counting, but it brought me more nervous. I was like, oh, this is like really building up.
Anytime he said, coach, let him know, he'll say, Richmond on 3 or whatever.
Yeah, Richmond on 3, right.
Yeah. So I know I have seen a post on this before, and there was all these theories about like 8. I don't know if it's an unlucky number or if I can't remember now, honestly. Like, I know I've read some, like, people had theories about it. I don't know. I just think that Isaac, like,
Isaac like has no idea what he's doing.
I think he just was like,
he's like Richmond on 12.
Yeah. I think that he just messed up the counting. Like, I don't think.
Oh, maybe. Yeah. Actually, you're right. Probably. Like, it's his first time. He doesn't really know what he's doing. Yeah, that actually makes sense. But the counting up made me even more nervous and excited, because I'm like, there's 12 guys. Are there 12 guys on the field? Like what is happening? There's only 11 actually. But like, because I feel with each number, they move to a different like look as they're panning the team.
Yeah.
And I'm getting like nervous. I'm like, let's go. Like, I'm ready. So I thought it was really well done. I thought it was phenomenal. I was like, oh.
And it's very possible that there was some like more layered meaning to it, because this show does not do anything like without some kind of intention. I just don't like, that's one where I don't know.
And I want to go back just for a moment of like, also, and this, this obviously ties in with like leadership, is like when Ted finally comes to the team earlier when they're planning for this game, and he gets the suggestions on all the trick plays. Mm-hmm. And he's like giving each, and like everyone's saying their trick play, and he's like commenting, and like talk about attunement, right? Talk about like connecting, but also talk about a leader being like, I don't know how we're going to figure this out, but we're going to figure this out together. And that is awesome. I think a real leader changes the hierarchy and gets rid of the hierarchy and allows for others to be like, you're going to teach me, I'm going to teach you. We're all going to teach each other, right? Because they were super excited to go out on the pitch. But think about that. If you were out on the pitch with that team, that would have been such a fun day, because each person would have been like, oh, okay, it's now my turn to lead.
Yeah.
And then everyone gets an opportunity. And then you're like, could that actually work in a game? That's the part that I was like, ooh, this is really good.
To the point about feeling a sense of agency and empowerment, right? Because now you're creating this level of buy-in with your team where everyone feels invested, because they feel like, I'm invested now because I helped to create like whatever our strategy is here. Our strategy is about chaos. I helped to contribute to that, And so there is that sense of buy-in.
And even if they don't pick that person's play, just the idea that they felt seen and they got to coach the rest of the team is super powerful. And again, brings together the team. It was just National Fun at Work Day, and I did a whole thing about like, you shouldn't play if, there's not psychological safety.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest ways to build psychological safety is to listen to your staff and allow them to teach and mentor and lead as much as you are sometimes. And I think a lot of times we forget that. So I need to say.
It's so true. It's so true. And going back to what we were talking about earlier with like the parallels between leadership and parenting, right? It's funny because you hear like I've often heard a lot of leaders complain about feeling like, oh my God, it's like I'm leading a bunch of babies or, like children or whatever. But rarely do we see the flip side of that, right? Where they're like, oh, I've empowered my people and I trust them to go out and I'm putting my faith in them to like carry out the things that I've tried to instill in them. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a big piece that is sometimes missing, because I also think like leaders feel overwhelmed and they don't feel like they have the time, but everything that we do, we're modeling also as leaders. Right. So,
and think about it, when they finally implement one of those trick plays, when they implement the Sandman off the corner kick and everyone leaps over it, like, to just see how excited Lasso is, even though they didn't score, just the idea that they pulled it off. And then everyone else, like the fans are like, what is this? Where's this coming from? Like it must be so exciting and empowering when something you've been working on in practice over and over again finally actually comes to fruition. And it's just like, man, that is the magic you can have as a leader if you're willing to empower your people to lead themselves. So
the other one, when Isaac calls the Lasso special towards the end, and Ted's like, "Oh my God! Like, holy moly! Like, I didn't even tell them." Yeah, he's just like,
"Oh, this is so good! This is so good!"
Yeah. So in the match, though, I also felt like there was like a full circle moment, right, where when Roy gets hurt.
Before he gets hurt, the tortoise caught the hare.
That was really funny. Yeah, that was funny too. When he goes out and the announcer's like, Man City's speed has been a problem. And, it's surprising that Lasso put in Roy, who, to put it politely, is slow.
Is slow. And they've been criticizing him about him being so slow, right? But then if you think of the Roy Kent chant, he's here, he's there, he's every fucking where, Roy Kent, Roy Kent. Like that, his anger has always gotten him to show up wherever he's supposed to show up, even though he isn't the fastest dude. And you're like, how is this guy pulling this off? So I thought that was like phenomenal when he made that play of all plays.
Yeah.
And then Sam doesn't lift him up, but just lets him be like, let's savor. We're talking about positive psychology. Let's savor this moment.
Yeah.
This might be, your last moment, but let's savor it. And also let's savor, not only let's savor it for ourselves, but let's savor it for the fans.
Yeah.
Because the fans, this may be the last time they see him on the pitch, right?
That was like that full circle for me, right? Like when he was the captain and Sam got hurt and Jamie didn't check on him and Roy got into a fight with Jamie on the pitch, like check on your teammate, right? So when he now gets hurt, it's Sam who comes to check on him because Sam has seen that modeled.
Yeah.
And Roy did the same thing for Sam where he wouldn't let him get up. He said, here's what you're going to do. And now like Sam is doing the same thing back for Roy saying, listen. And I don't know, maybe this is common and I don't watch enough sports to know, like when he claps everyone off the field, like as he's walking and he's clapping the fans, Roy?
Usually players will do that at the end of the game, especially when they're thanking the fans and especially when it's your last time.
Yeah.
So a lot of times when there's a lot of old players that are like leaving the English Premier League or just like all those teams to come and play for the US, actually come play for US teams. So they will trudge them out there one last time. But usually it's in my opinion, a lot of times a sad, pathetic way because like, they're not really playing. But in this case, like Roy goes out like full out, right?
Yeah.
And then he like limps off the field, as himself. So he doesn't leave when it's too late.
Right.
He left right at the time. And then he also like gives that look to Ted and then just like.
I cried like through like every scene of this episode. There was like something and that look, like when they just, oh my gosh, they look at each other and they acknowledge each other, like there's a respect between them.
There's a respect. And it ties back into earlier when Roy says, it's so hard to love you. This is why it's so hard to love you. And then he's just like, did you hear that? Did you hear that? Without saying he loved me, he just said he loved me. Like, woo!
That whole scene was so great. Like, first of all, they're back and forth. So again, to your point of attunement with the like you have to pick a new captain. No, you have to pick and going back and forth. But watching Beard's reaction to the whole thing, I mean, I was laughing so hard.
Wait, what was Beard's reaction?
Because Beard is just like watching back and forth. Is like they're throwing the and then when he throws the thing and it lands on his head, and Beard's like, and I love that of whatever that Roy just said about this is why it's hard to love you. What they take away is, oh, he loves you.
Yeah, right.
I was like, that's awesome. But the other thing about the match is Jamie making the extra pass. Like,
oh yeah.
I mean, talk about growth, like full circle growth, right? Like that was the thing at the beginning that Ted, who's like unflappable, was just so fed up with Jamie because he was so selfish on the field.
Yep.
And now, like, Jamie has come to realize, like, okay, I can take the shot or I can make the pass. And he chooses to make the pass, which, as we know, his father is like super mad about.
Yeah.
But I loved, that was another moment is at the end where Beard gives him that letter or that envelope, because now Ted has seen, like, Jamie's talked about how his dad treated him in the episode where they burned all the things.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's where right before he gets traded back or like given back to Man City, he has finally told the team, like, this is why he acts the way he does, is because this is what his father, but now Ted has seen it. And it's just, that one line about, way to make the extra pass and the army man.
And why that army man? Why do you think that army man? Because I didn't understand.
So I did a little deeper dive on this because I
knew you would.
So at the beginning of the series, his son sends him the bag of army men to protect him.
Yeah.
And so we've seen him hand these out like throughout the series, and he tends to hand them out to people who he thinks like need that little extra boost. And so the first one he gives is to Rebecca, and he gives Rebecca the rifleman. So speculation is that it's Ted letting her know that he's her first line of defense.
Mm.
And then he gives a machine gunner to Sam, which Sam returns. But the message is that Ted is encouraging Sam to shoot more. So shoot more goals. Because this is when he also moves them forward, right, from his old position.
Yeah.
And then we talked about this one last time about the grenadier sitting on his table when he's trying to sign his divorce papers, right? So Ted had that for himself. But so he hands Jamie, the one he hands Jamie is the one with the binoculars, which is the scout. And the message is that Ted is and always has been looking out for Jamie. And I thought, like, that is like, that's amazing.
And you can actually see Jamie tear up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's the first time I see like that emotion from him. I think what's so ironic about that is that in the end, Ted won. Even though his team lost, like his whole goal from the very beginning was like, I want to develop these, players and, into like men, into people that believe in themselves. And that is actually exactly what happens, which is really interesting. I do love, just going back briefly to the Lasso special. Sam is up front when he like forwards the. At first, no one would ever do that play, but whatever, it doesn't matter. It's hilarious, and it's hilarious that the announcers are like, he's moving in motion, because it's like they really are calling a football game right now. Like, this looks like an NFL game. Like, but it's awesome that Sam gives the assist to Rojas, of all things, who does like this side / bicycle kick, which is just so amazing, right? Like, you see this in all the corny Mighty Duck type movies, and then you're like, oh my goodness. But what's fascinating is then while they're celebrating, Jamie is leading, because Jamie gets the ball out of the goal and is just like, let's move up, let's go. And I was like, that is another part in which Lasso has taught him. He's actually following his convictions and being like, listen, we're still going to win this game. It's like, dang, yeah, that was very impressive.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've talked about this, but I don't remember that. That was one of the requirements when they were looking for people to be on this show, was that they wanted people who could actually play football. And so Danny Rojas, he was actually a player for a team in Mexico.
Oh, wow.
A professional player. Yeah.
Oh, and then I forgot to say this part about Roy is when Roy goes into the locker room. I think this is a really powerful scene. When Roy goes into the locker room and then Keely comes in and he's like, you're not allowed to be here. And then he's like, get out of here.
Yeah.
And she keeps coming closer and closer. And it's like, it's so fascinating that when we need people the most, we push them away.
Yeah.
And Ted talks about that at the end when he's like, yes, it's sad. Yes, it's sad. Look your heads up and look around. Be grateful that you are doing this. You're being sad and you're doing this sad moment with each other.
Yeah.
It's sad being alone and then being sad. And that's really what Roy at one point wanted. He was just like, get it. But he really didn't want to be alone, And she was just like, I'm just going to sit here. That scene I thought was so powerful.
So powerful.
Like, we do that. All of us do that all the time.
In terms of the pushing away, right?
Pushing people away at the time when we need people the most.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. And it's such a powerful scene because there's not really any words spoken between them. When I teach about empathy, it's one of the things we talk about is like, you don't have to do anything extraordinary when someone is hurting. It's just about, we call it creating a ministry of presence. So it's about being present to them in that moment without ever having to say a word. And the thing is, to your point, like when we push people away, honestly, like as a society, we are not good at dealing with like conflict in this way. And we don't understand that, like we talked about in the past, that within us, there's always like this hurt little child, and so we don't understand this idea of hurt people. And so when we are pushing people away because we're hurt or we're embarrassed or whatever, people will often just leave instead of saying, and she has the courage to just keep walking in. She doesn't argue with him. She doesn't say anything.
Yep.
And it's just the act of like putting her arm around him, and you see him just soften and give into it, because that's a huge moment for him. Like he knows his career's over, and like how scary and disappointing and sad. And, there's some grief that's going to come. Like it's a lot,
Everything that he's known for the last like decade and a half,
since he was a kid,
his whole life.
Yeah.
His whole life. Yeah. Is now gone.
Didn't he say he got scouted at like 9 or 10? Yeah. Like, he was young.
10. Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's powerful when he says, Sam, who has what animal has the shortest attention span? And he goes, let's be sad now. Let's be sad together.
Oh, I love
and
that.
Then let's be goldfish. And you're like, you're just like, and it's not this like grand historic speech. It's just like, I love the idea of like, let's allow ourselves to feel all the emotion, right? Positive psychology. Like, don't do toxic positivity. Don't gaslight. Don't pretend like you're not sad. Like, let's all feel it, and let's all feel it together. And when you're ready, and that's a huge part of it, when you're ready, each and every one of you, then be like a goldfish. And I think if we embrace that more ourselves, we would have better lives.
For sure. I was thinking back to where I was working before, and we had some really terrible things happen. And there was like a good part of leadership at the highest levels that just ignored it, didn't even acknowledge it was happening. And that's why I love his little speech there. It's not little, so meaningful. But to your point, it's just acknowledging the reality. Yeah, this sucks. And I'm not going to try to fix it. I'm not going to try to do it. You get to be sad. You get to be angry. You get to be however you feel right now, but you don't get to do it alone,
Yeah.
And then this idea, and I love when he says onward, forward, right? Because that's the other thing, is we can't get stuck in that place. It's so easy when we are in that space of sadness and anger that we spiral and we get stuck. And then it's so hard to climb out. And I was thinking back to that onward, forward piece. You can't move onward and forward without hope. That hope is really what propels you to be able to move onward and forward. When you've hit that wall or you've experienced something really bad, you need the hope in order to keep moving.
And I think that's what's so powerful, right? Is because then Ted is like, well, I'm going to resign, and I'm going to resign on this takeout menu.
From the Indian restaurant, by the way.
Yeah, from the Indian restaurant of all places. And then Rebecca's like, she's now found the hope.
Yeah.
And she's like, no, you're staying. And then he goes from, okay, well, then if I'm committed, then we're going to get relegated, and then we're going to win the whole fucking thing. And you're like, oh, like, wow. Like the boldness at such a tough time is also really powerful. And as he's saying it, you believe.
Well, and that's another little Easter egg. So that is actually a line that was from the movie Major League.
Oh, yeah. No, yeah. I love that movie. Yes.
So sorry, going back to that ending in the locker room real quick. So I know I always talk about the music. I think that Marcus Mumford's rendition of You'll Never Walk Alone, like between like that ending on the pitch and then coming into the locker room, like that music adds a lot to how we're feeling about what's happening. And I didn't know this, I found this out, but it was actually, I thought that it was maybe something that they had actually, like Mumford and Sons had created, but it was actually written by Oscar Hammerstein of Rodgers and Hammerstein for the musical Carousel. But the lyrics for that are all about like walking through a storm, holding your head high, not being afraid of the dark, walking on with hope in your heart. And if you do that, you'll never walk alone. I mean, gosh, they're just so good at pulling all that together. And the very ending song after he spits all over Rebecca is actually a song by a French musician, Edith Piaf. It's Non je ne regrette rien, which translates to like no regrets, but today it starts with you. And so like, that's such a perfect way to end, that whole season of we did all the things we did. Rebecca did all the things that she did, which had she not, like, they probably would not have gotten relegated, because when the team came together and having Jamie and Danny on the team working together, like they probably would have been in a far different position, but they learned a lot of things along the way. And I think that moment that we talked about last week of forgiveness between Ted and Rebecca, like it just solidifies their relationship to where like there will now be so much trust between the two of them, and so like all those things needed to happen in order for them to get to where they're at. And it's going to motivate them, right, as they move forward. That was an amazing season.
That was an amazing season. So as we wrap up, what is your biggest takeaway?
Oh, I was thinking about that too. There's this, I don't know, the show is like, it's so amazing. But I think for me, the biggest takeaways are really, this idea of curiosity above everything, like just trying to be more curious in dealing with people and dealing with ourselves, like why certain things are coming up and things like that. And then that I love that concept of believe, right? Like it applies to like believing in ourselves, believing in each other, believing in the things, that are happening around us, for us, by us. For me, like those were really kind of the overarching things that I'm taking away after this season for sure.
Yeah, I'm taking away this idea of like, you'll never walk alone. That at any moment, and I've been talking about playing attunement this whole time, but it's like, you're always, in every action that you do, you always have an impact on somebody. Mm-hmm. So the question is like, what type of impact do you want to have, right? How do you want to show up? How do you want to show up in a room? How do you want to show up at this moment? Because like all of that adds up to something phenomenal and amazing. So what do you want to do?
I love that. It's such a good way to think about, right?
Well, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure, and I'm excited to dive into season 2. But yes, thanks so much.
Yeah, it has been so much fun, Jeff. And I appreciate you so much for doing this. And I cannot wait to hear your reactions to season 2 because
I've never watched it. All right. Take care, everyone. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to What Would Ted Lasso Do? If you got any nuggets of Ted Lasso wisdom from this episode, try them out in your life and let us know what happens at WWTLD Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, or at our website, www.tldpodcast.com, where you'll also find a full transcript of the show. We love hearing what other TED Heads took away from the episode or details or perspectives that we might have missed.
And if you do like the show, please subscribe and head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating. It all helps. We don't know exactly why, but it does. So in the spirit of believing in hope, believing in believe, please help us out.
And thank you to Podify and Sam Davidson for producing our show, to Kajal Davalia for our visuals and graphics, and to Kenzie Slatow for our theme song. And most of all, thank you to all of you for listening.
Ted Lasso could simply just be another show to binge watch. Or if we challenge ourselves to consistently ask the question, what would Ted Lasso do? It could change the trajectory of your life. It has for us.
So join us again next time as we explore another episode and ask ourselves, what would Ted Lasso do?